So can we get Anup in the spotlight? Yeah, thank you. So the next session is with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Let me introduce Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Uh, he's an American medical doctor and neurosurgeon who has researched and practiced optimal nutrition for over 20 years. He believes that the so-called chronic diseases doctors treat are caused by the food we eat or don't eat and can be reversed with dietary changes. He's an MD from the Royal College of Surgeons and an All-American rugby player, and is also trained in MMA fighting. More recently, he volunteered as a doctor in the refugee camps in Bangladesh, helping the Rohingya refugees from Burma. His most famous YouTube talk, I think, is Plants Are Trying to Kill You. And that has taken the nutrition world by storm. I at least have watched it at least 5, 6 times, if not less. So although in India it could create a mini storm outrage kind of a thing, but nonetheless, Dr. Chaffee is a legend when it comes to carnivore and the autoimmune diseases. Let's talk to Dr. Chaffee, aka the plant-free MD. Welcome, Dr. Chaffee. And with me is Anup Singh, the founder of D-Life and the organizer of this metabolic health conference. Welcome.
Welcome. Welcome.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So I think I'll ask you the first question, Dr. Chaffee. Autoimmune is something, I mean, whenever you do a live, I try to be there most of the times. And it's such a pleasure to hear you out and, and the clarity that you give on autoimmune cases. Being a metabolic health coach, I deal with a lot of autoimmune cases. And as you must, you always say that. I'm going to ask something which is very specific to autoimmune cases. And being a patient of autoimmune case myself at one point of time, I was on the verge of a kidney transplant when I went carnivore and reversed my autoimmune completely within a matter of few months. So I was at Dr. Sean Baker's podcast and I had spoken about it. But tell me, why do they say an autoimmune disease is, they don't know the cause and they don't know the cure of it? Why do they say that? I mean, such an ambiguous and a confusing state to be in for a patient.
It absolutely is. The vast majority of the etiologies that we treat as doctors are idiopathic, meaning that we don't know what's causing them. And I think that the main reason we don't know what's causing them is because no one's looking. We're treating them with very expensive medications that treat the symptoms, and they're the good enough sort of solution. And then no one's actually investigating what's the cause, because I think the main driver of this is the money is in the direction of building a product, and that product is going to be more financially viable if it's something that gets used continually. So it's something that has to be used lifelong. It just settles the symptoms down. So they're not actually investigating, well, what's the cause? Because if you find out the cause, then you can actually make it go away. And then, of course, you can't sell the medications for their whole life. You sell it, the cure once, and then that's it. And so that's not a very good or not a very viable business model. Goldman Sachs even said this in one of their board meetings, and it was leaked from a slide that they presented that asked the question, is curing someone of disease a viable business model? And of course, the answer to that is no. You want them to keep coming back and returning for medicine. So I think the main reason we don't know what a lot of the causes of these diseases are is because people, frankly, aren't looking. And the majority of the money is going into a very different direction. So it's up to us as clinicians and those patients and people that are interested in finding out what's actually going on in the root cause to investigate these sorts of things. I think it is eminently apparent that this is something that is largely, if not completely, to do with our diet, an inappropriate diet. You even look at animals such as our domesticated pets or livestock or animals in the zoo. If they're fed an inappropriate diet, they will get autoimmune diseases. They will get diabetes. They will get cancer. And then when you feed them their natural diet, those problems tend to go away. And so we get the same problems of the same name, and yet we have no idea what's causing it. So I think that a large majority of the diseases that we're treating nowadays, like autoimmunity, like diabetes and others, are a product of eating food that we're not designed to eat biologically. Just like if you feed a panda, eucalyptus, they're going to get sick. They're not going to have a healthy state of being. And if you feed them Cheetos and potato chips, then they're going to get all
Yes.
sorts of problems as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Could you take
Dr.
the
Anthony.
second question?
Yeah. So autoimmune diseases normally, are treated through steroids, and it messes up the gut. It's a well-known, I think it's a well-known established fact. Now, if this is so, then is this a correct paradigm? Point number one. And second is, if it is non-responsive in the long run, as you said, the model is to let the customers keep coming back. So why is this route chosen for treating? Why not look at diet?
Well, it's a very good question. I think the reason that clinicians don't look to diet first and foremost is because they're not taught that it can be an effective means of treatment. However, there are papers and studies and randomized controlled trials in at least some autoimmune diseases, such as Crohn's disease, where you put someone on an elemental diet, which is just the macro and micronutrients that we need and nothing else. And that has been shown in human trials to be a better treatment for an acute flare-up of Crohn's than prednisone. So steroids, right? So the gold standard for getting somebody out of a flare-up is not as good as just not eating certain things. And so we have other studies as well in Crohn's, where if you remove carbohydrates and you remove fiber, that without medications, this has been shown to keep people in remission up to 51 months. So that's over 4 years without medications. And that was contrasted with the control group that did not eliminate carbohydrates and fiber, and they stayed in remission without medication 0 months on average. So it's a massive, massive contrast. The problem is that there's no drug reps coming in to tell doctors, hey, look at this study. This is a novel way that you can approach this, because there's no one backing that. There's no product at the end of the line. And so the studies are there. You can find them. But you have to look for them. No one's going to bring it to you. They're not going to be presented to students in medical school, because the curriculum is largely driven by the food and pharmaceutical industries, as are residency programs and are the CME conferences. They're all funded by the big food and drug companies as well. And so you just don't see these. You can go to other conferences and you will see these things presented, but you have to go looking for them. They're not going to come to you. And that's very unfortunate, but more people are coming to this. And there's literature going back literally to the 1800s of autoimmune diseases, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, and other such diseases being treated with specifically a meat and water diet, specifically a red meat and water diet.
You talked about Dr. Salisbury diet.
Correct.
Dr. Salisbury's diet. Yes.
Yeah.
In your life. Yes.
Yeah. So he's so it's eponymous for the Salisbury steak. I always thought it was a place name, like Salisbury, England. It's just a hamburger patty, really, and it's ground up in a way that you remove the gristle, so it's very easy to digest and absorb. And that was specifically for people with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and other digestive issues, that they really had to rest their bowel completely. So if you remove the gristle, then people tend to absorb nearly 100% of the meat that they're eating. Even with the gristle, they'll absorb 98% or so, and just very, very small amount will go out. But he really needed people to just completely rest their bowel, so he removed the gristle as well, and that was a Salisbury steak. But he did a 30-year research project into optimal nutrition for human beings in the 1800s, and this was before the processed food industry, before seed oils and refined sugars and grains became so prevalent in our society, or before the seed oils even existed to a large degree, certainly for food. And he found that people that were just eating more plants and grains were getting diseases other people simply weren't, such as autoimmunity. They were more susceptible to tuberculosis. They were even getting gout. And that people such as the Plains, the Native Americans in the Great Plains, who were essentially just eating American buffalo, they would scare a herd of buffalo over a cliff, and they would preserve their meat for the rest of the year. And that's what they would eat for the entire year. They just eat meat the whole year. And they were some of the healthiest people alive on earth. They lived quite a long time by their own records. We don't have official birth certificates on a lot of these people, but their own reports and records show them living to be 110, 115, even upwards of 120 years, which sounds far-fetched. But I was taught in genetics class 20 years ago that we knew as geneticists that based on the length of our telomeres, we should live 120 years on average. And so we're dying decades early.
Yes.
And we should be able to if we just stay out of our own way and don't mess up, we should make it to 120 without doing anything special. So something's really cutting back on the course of our lives. And people say, well, eating this way, I had, I ate plants and all these sorts of things the other day and I didn't die. Therefore, that's not true. Well, you also smoked a pack of cigarettes and drank whiskey too, right? You didn't die then either, but it's the exposure over years and decades and so on that ends up really dragging people down. So when we see those records from the 1800s, clinicians using this all up until the 1970s, there was a Dr. Vogtland who wrote a book called The Stone Age Diet in 1975. And he was a gastroenterologist, and he argued the exact same things that Salisbury was saying, that humans biologically should be eating meat. We're not designed to eat plants very well. We can to a certain degree, but we don't do as well on them. And he basically showed that and just argued that if you didn't eat plants, then his profession as a gastroenterologist didn't need to exist because these problems would just go away. And so now people are rediscovering this and then just applying it to themselves. And it's that N of 1 study. It's the only one that matters. It doesn't matter what a study says. It says like, oh, if you change your diet, it's not gonna affect your Crohn's or rheumatoid arthritis. Well, if you do change your diet and it does put that into remission and you come off your medications, it really doesn't matter what the study says. And so that's what tens of thousands of people around the world are discovering now. And I personally have upwards of 100 autoimmune patients in my clinical practice who have significantly improved their autoimmunity, if not put it into complete remission. Things like Hashimoto's thyroiditis is a bit more stubborn. It takes a long time, but when I track their antibodies, they come down. It just takes a while. So it can take several months or even over a year before those antibodies really come down to zero, but they do as long as they stay strict. And then you see them eating, some bread or pasta or, having salad or something like that. And then they don't feel as well, they check the thyroid and they have a flare up. So it's a very clear cause and effect relationship.
So I want to bring the conversation back to the autoimmune, but I want to bring in the element of why you are against a plant-based diet. And your talk, you did an extremely critical and very science-based talk called "Plants Are Trying to Kill You," which people can check out on YouTube. Now, India being a largely vegetarian country where most people will not even eat eggs. How do we justify this position or this talk or this view of yours? And then I will bring the conversation onto the autoimmune part, because people who are diagnosed with autoimmune conditions, vegetarians, how do we look at that spectrum, which will come later? But then how do we justify plants are trying to kill you in the context of India?
Well, I mean, people can make that decision based on their own personal preferences, on their taste, on their religion, and all these other sorts of things. And that's something I completely respect, to people to make their own decisions. The reason I made that talk was simply to illustrate the fact that these plants have defense chemicals. They don't want to be eaten, just like any other living thing. Nothing wants to be eaten. Maybe lemmings, who knows? But the plants really don't want to be eaten, and they have robust defenses. They make about 1 million different defense chemicals in order to stop animals and insects from eating them. And it's just to point this out. We're being a bit too blasé with our approach to diet. We're saying that meat is evil. Meat is, in some religions, they think it's sinful to eat it because it gives you lustful feelings. And that it's not only bad for you, but bad for your soul, all these sorts of condemnations.
We have our own version of the Seventh-day Adventists. I
really?
can tell you that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. And so, I think that meat has been very falsely vilified. It's one thing if you have a personal predilection that runs in the direction of eating plants, that's fine. That's your choice. But to vilify the most healthy and nutritious food that exists on this planet for human beings, I think is just a bridge too far. And then to say that we should only be eating plants and that all plants are good for us, well, that doesn't even pass the smell test, because if you go out into the woods and you run out of food, you can't eat any random plant. Most of them will make you
Yes.
very sick or even kill you. And that's something that is pretty common knowledge and hopefully is understood by most people, or else they're due to get hurt. So
Mm.
it's just pointing that out. People are eating more plant-based diet in America. We eat a 70-75% plant-based diet. It's just processed plant-based diet. And that's a problem too, is that this whole big vegetarian plant-based movement is largely being driven by the food and drug companies who profit greatly from this, because they don't
Yes.
go to the raw quinoa salads type of vegetarianism. They go to the processed food aisle and they get that sort of thing. Maybe they start off being clean, but then they shift over. Oh, if it's plants, it's okay. So in India and the rest of the world, people are getting sicker. The chronic disease rates are becoming a larger burden. More people are dying of chronic diseases. About 90% of people of the deaths in the Western world, and I think it's similar in India, are due to chronic diseases, these non-communicable chronic diseases that did not exist to any great extent a century ago or before that. And so more people are getting sick. If I remember the statistic correctly, 1 in 4 people from India will die of a heart attack. 1 in 3 men will die of a heart attack. So this is a massive burden of disease. And so I don't
Yes.
think that, the plant-based approach is really helping people from India. I think that largely it's hurting them. It doesn't have to be beef. It doesn't have to be lamb or chicken. I mean, it could be eggs. I understand there are people that don't want to eat eggs, but it is very healthy. And I think it's important to let people understand that you have to get certain nutrients from animal-based foods. You can't supplement properly. And that's a bit of an elitist sort of argument as well. People saying, well, you can just supplement. Like, well,
Yeah.
no, most people
Yeah.
can't actually. Most people don't have access to these supplements, and most people don't have the ability to afford these supplements.
Yeah. Why not just have natural foods and the real foods
Exactly.
instead of supplementing? Yeah.
That's it.
The next question Anup would ask, but just to extend this, now that we are talking about vegetables or plant-based diets, of late, Dr. Shafi, a lot of vegans and vegetarians have started claiming to put autoimmune under remission. Now, you are dealing with autoimmune cases day in and day out, and I am also dealing with them. And the first thing that I see is when they go back, and especially people with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, when they introduce plants, even a garlic or an onion or ginger just flares up the condition. So,
Yeah.
how are people who are eating or who are propagating a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet claiming that it can be put under remission? Is that possible? Is that a lie? I'm very eager to know.
Well, it could very well be a lie. It's but I'm sure a lot of people do improve, because when you're eating a very highly processed food diet, switching to a more whole food approach and cleaning that up and getting rid of a lot of this the burden of disease that you're putting in your mouth every day is going to make improvements. Now, these people may be on medications still, and so the reduction of processed foods and these sorts of things and going to a more whole food approach along with the medication may do very well for them. I don't know. I can't speak for every individual. Some of them are going to be lying. Some of them may be telling the truth. But I do know that the vast majority of people who follow me on social media and on YouTube, which is, all told over 500,000 people, is the vast majority of them were formerly vegans and vegetarians. And that well over 60%. I've done polls and it's well over 60%. And so they have all come to a carnivore diet because they went to a plant-based diet because they were told this is the healthiest way for them to live, or maybe the ethical arguments and environmental arguments. Then they found that, well, actually they're getting very sick and they're getting very unwell. They start eating meat, they get better, they improve, they get rid of plants, and they really improve. And so I see the exact opposite. So there might be outliers here and there that do better, and I'm sure they'll do better switching from a processed food diet to a whole food plant-based diet. But it's not because they got rid of meat; it's because they got rid of all these other things. And I always ask them, they say, "Well, I got better on a vegan diet," and I said, "Okay. So is the only thing you changed that you got rid of meat?" Like, yeah. When I went vegan, everything got better. Like, okay. So you still smoke, you still drink, you still eat sugar, still drink soda, still, eating cookies and cake. And it's, oh, no, I don't eat anything processed. I cook all my own meals. I don't go out to eat. I'm not drinking soda. Stop drinking alcohol. It's like, okay, so you've done a lot of things there differently.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
obviously those are all going to make a difference. I mean, I have patients that are so sensitive to plants. One, depending on people's ethnic origin, they have come to agricultural crop ways of eating, more or less recently. People from our heritage in India and Europe and Middle East and Northern Africa, they've had several thousand years to adapt to plant-based agriculture. People in Australia, the native Australians, about 100 years. Native Americans, about 100, except for Mesoamerica, they sort of developed their own versions of agriculture. They get very sick very quickly. So they get the same diseases. It's still the same diseases. And it's only when eating a plant-based Western diet. But it's far more prevalent. So the Native American population and the Native Canadian population, they have far higher rates of chronic disease when eating a Western diet. I have patients that I've consulted with who are from the Native Canadian population, the Inuit population, the First Nation population, as they call it. And they said that they were basically carnivore their whole life because that's their culture. They're living up in the North Pole. There's nothing to eat except meat anyway. And now it's more Westernized, so they can ship in and fly in different resources and Western foods. But they know that you just hunt, and that's what they do. But they have other things as well. So this lady was basically meat only for over 40 years because her daughter had intractable epilepsy seizures when she was a baby. As soon as she weaned off breast milk, she started having seizures, eating anything except meat. So she had to only eat meat. So they just ate meat for the last 40 years. And she was doing fine. But then she had a couple other health issues. She actually had 4 autoimmune diseases. And she came across, my plants are trying to kill you thing, and me arguing that, you really want to get rid of all these plants. And she thought, well, that can't be. It's just spices, it's just seasonings, that I'm just eating meat otherwise. But she tried it for a month, and she got rid of the spices and seasonings. All 4 autoimmune diseases went away, and they went into remission without medications. So some people are very sensitive to this. And there are a lot of people specifically with autoimmunity that come to a carnivore diet specifically because of that. And they come from a plant-based diet and they have horrible autoimmunity. They have a honeymoon period where they're doing better than when they were on a processed food diet. But then the major problems still don't go away, and then they start getting nutritional deficiencies and other sorts of things. It doesn't matter how much you supplement. There are nutrients that we don't even have names for by the thousands that we have not discovered yet. And so, you're not going to be able to catalog all these sorts of things, and it will catch up with you. And the fact of the matter is that we don't even know in modern medicine, we don't even know what the right ranges for a lot of these nutrients are, because the reference ranges we use are an average for the population. Average person is getting more and more nutritionally deficient. And so you get a test and it says, oh, your B12 is fine. It's like, I bet you it's not. That half the range in a lot of these countries are actually in a state of true deficiency. And so if you're basically normal for B12, you're low.
India is usually deficient in vitamin D, B12 as well, because as I said, most people are eating plant-based diet. But I think, Anup, you want to go ahead and ask the next question?
Yeah. So what are the food groups basically which are a no-no in autoimmune condition?
So autoimmunity, they have to be very careful. I mean, anything outside of just our strict biologically appropriate diet can flare up an autoimmune attack. Even animals that are fed an inappropriate diet for that species, if they're being fed plants that they're not designed to eat, if pigs and chicken and even fish are being fed corn, wheat, and soy that they're not designed to eat, they're not going to be able to filter out and detoxify these things as well as you would like. And so some of those toxins can get into the meat and get higher levels of linoleic acid, which is the omega-6, the plant version of omega-6 that we don't really want and certainly don't need. And that can trigger autoimmunity. As far as what I can see, the autoimmunity comes from these plant toxins and would be other toxins as well, getting into the bloodstream in our body reacting and responding to them. The original thought was that maybe there's a sensitizing infection, maybe you had a virus or something else, and your body attacked that, made antibodies, and then through molecular mimicry, they were close enough to our own antigens, and then they started attacking them and sensitizing themselves to our thyroid or our colon or something else. That never really made too much sense to me because I took postgraduate immunology before I went to medical school, and it was very clear, our immune cells get matured in the bone marrow and the thymus and tested against every single antigen in the body. And if they respond even weakly to one of these antigens, they're killed. They don't make it out. And so you really shouldn't be able to make any antibodies that will directly attack, and you shouldn't be able to sensitize yourself to your own antigens anyway. They shouldn't have the capability of doing that. Obviously, if everything goes right, but it does seem that there could be that these plant toxins are sort of glomming on and attacking different parts, and your body is making an antibody towards that complex. And the reason that makes sense is because we have specific antibodies for things like parietal cell antibodies, for pernicious anemia, or the Hashimoto's antibodies, or the Graves' disease antibodies, and you can measure these, and they're specific. And so, that seems to be the case. And if we were just all responding to little toxins and our body were making antibodies towards them, then they were having cross reaction, well, then we should all have those antibodies. They should be ubiquitous, but they're not. They're very specific. So that makes more sense to me, that these things are sticking onto our organs, and then our body's attacking that complex, where it's sort of attacking on, like lectins and different sorts of things can sort of attack our organs, and then we're making antibodies specific towards that complex. Either way, the treatment is the same. You stop eating plants and those antibodies come right down. And so that's why it doesn't make sense that you've sensitized yourself to your own organs, because when you stop eating plants and you stop eating those things, those antibodies just come right down. Whereas if they were sensitized to your thyroid or another part of your body, they should just keep going until that part of your body is dead and it doesn't have any antigens left. But it doesn't. It's the exact opposite. So all plants basically can trigger this off. So carbohydrates, grains, beans, seeds, legumes, these high lectin containing plants are generally the worst. Things with that are nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, those are very bad as well. Very high lectin content, solanine, all these other sorts of toxins that can cause a major issue. But even dairy can be a problem. Ghee is generally okay, but milk and cheese, that can be an issue. And even meat that has from an animal that's being fed the wrong thing too, that can trigger people off. And that's why Dr. Salisbury found in the 1800s that it really needed to be the ruminant meats.
Yes.
So it could be, goat, lamb, or venison, but the ones that have that complex foregut that can ferment and detoxify these plants initially before they absorb them. Those seem to do the best. And so what I generally recommend for my patients is that they'll cut out everything except meat and water, but they'll do best on just the ruminant meat and water. And to date, I have yet to see an autoimmune condition that didn't respond extremely favorably to a red meat and water diet only. Very serious ones, so multiple sclerosis, I've seen people come out of wheelchairs and be able to walk again and get their life back again. Rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, gout, ulcerative colitis, lupus, everything. Hashimoto's, Graves' disease.
Yes.
I've never seen an autoimmune disease not respond extremely well.
So I think two very valid points for people like, people who come asking me, can they put their autoimmune under remission on a vegetarian diet? My answer is largely no, because I have seen how vegetables flare up. Now, being brainwashed towards vegetables in India is very chronic, and people are not willing to trust you that they cannot put their autoimmune fully into remission on a plant-based, grain-based diet. So that's one thing. Dr. Chaffee, let me come to a very critical question. I've been wanting to ask you this. You've said a couple of times autoimmune melts away on the carnivore diet. I want you to please explain what you are wanting to say. How is it possible? What are the spectrums that you're talking about? Because it's such a definitive statement that it needs an explanation.
Yeah, well, it's just that phenomenon where you see when you put people on a red meat and water diet, and then you measure their antibodies, and they just rapidly come down. This is an
Mm,
objective measure, and then they stop eating that way, and they come right back up. And so I see that again and again in my patient population. My patients are generally pretty good because I impress upon them the importance of this, and I make a good argument, and I give them a lot of resources, and they're usually bought in. But when they dabble and they branch out from that, they start feeling worse. They can get symptomatology again. If we check them, their antibodies just come right back up. Then they stop, comes right back down. Things like Graves' disease and Hashimoto's, maybe a bit more, especially Hashimoto's, may have a bit of a delay. So if you eat the
mm,
wrong thing and your antibodies go up, sort of slows down your thyroid production. And over the next few days or weeks, you may feel a bit more run down. So it can be a bit more
mm,
subtle unless you've really flared it up. But
mm,
with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, these sorts of things, it's very cut and dry. If you eat something
mm.
outside of red meat and water, all of a sudden you have 30 bouts of bloody diarrhea for the next 3 days.
Yes,
Then
I'm glad you
you're
said that.
never going to eat that again. Same with rheumatoid arthritis. Your joints flare up and you can't walk properly for the next week. You're like, right, not doing salad again. And so it's very clear. And so when, especially with like things like Crohn's disease and
Yes.
ulcerative colitis, these are very symptomatic, very painful, very, very difficult to deal with.
It is, and
And
people do expect instant gratification. I mean,
Mhm.
I've seen very serious cases of ulcerative colitis, but the fact is, if you say that at your place, people are largely meat eaters and they would listen to you. If I have a case of ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, and I've had both, and you try telling them, you put them on a carnivore diet because you're seeing everything is practically flaring up. So you bring them down to a meat, salt, water diet. But the it takes time to get over that curve. And in that period, if somebody says you should go back to the plant-based diet because I don't think this is working, they will immediately switch.
Mm, yeah, that's not fun.
So,
Yeah,
so, so yeah, it's a very
yeah,
amazing story of autoimmune people in India because
yeah.
vegetarian, they need a vegetarian spectrum in everything, basically.
Yeah, it's tough. It is very tough. I have one lady from India, and she's just, yeah, she's not vegan, but she just doesn't want to do meat. She's a physician here in Perth. And that's totally fine. I'm happy to support her in any way that I can. Her bloods aren't the best, and she does have other sorts of issues that I know would be very, very helped by going on a meat only diet. So I just try to encourage her the best I can to, try to get her just to eat mostly eggs, cut out, go sort of into a ketogenic approach, get out the beans and legumes and the pulses and the seeds and nuts as much as possible, and then support her as best I can. But it is very difficult. You have to meet people where they are. If they're just saying like, look, I'm just not going to do it. Fine. Okay. Well, let's see what we can do for you. That's the best possible. And given the circumstances. But if they are willing to try for 30 days or so and just do meat, even goat or lamb for a month, the ruminant meat, people do a lot better on that. I know people with Crohn's disease that if they eat pork chop or chicken, or even eggs, they might get a flare up. It's generally because of what the animal's been fed, which may not be as big of a problem in India, but um, it's if it's possible to eat just the ruminant meat for 30 days, I would I would be very surprised if they didn't have a significant improvement in their Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. Generally, what I see is 2 to 3 weeks in, symptoms improve pretty much right away on a red meat and water diet. After about 3 weeks, typically they don't have many symptoms left, if any at all. And after 2, 3 months, generally would be clean biopsy on colonoscopy. And I've yet to see
Amazing.
someone not have a clear biopsy after 3 months on a red meat and water
Mm,
diet with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. So, they just melt away. They just go away. I think of it not as a disease, but as a toxicity. This is a toxin toxicity relationship where we're exposing ourselves to something, we're getting sick, and then you remove that something and our bodies recover from it. It's like when the Romans had lead pipes and they were all getting low-grade lead poisoning, And they just thought that was part of getting older. And it took them a long time to
Mm.
figure out that no, actually we're being poisoned by something. And there are many
Yeah.
examples of this over the years. Recently in Japan, they had one where they had like mercury getting leaked out into the oceans, and they thought it was some sort of infectious disease, and they were trying to cure this infectious disease for over a decade, and they were looking for the cause for over a decade, and then they spent another decade trying to cure this microbe that didn't actually have anything to do with it. And so it took them 20 something years to figure out there's mercury poisoning, right? So
Yeah.
we're living in that moment right now. We're being poisoned
Mm.
by the things that we're eating. And so we're treating this very differently. We're treating this as if it were a disease. This is not a disease. This is a toxic exposure. And so you treat those things differently. You don't treat a toxic exposure with medicine as a baseline. You maybe it's a medicine to help you weather that storm and clear it out. But the main thing you do is you remove the exposure. And so that's what we need to do. You remove this exposure and the toxicity
Yes.
goes away. You remove the toxin, the toxicity goes away, and you allow your body to heal. And that's why I say it just melts away, because it's the same thing as if we had lead pipes and we're getting lead poisoning, and you remove the lead pipes and they look at that, everything just goes away. And then someone says, well, but you didn't cure it though, because if they drink water from lead pipes again, they just get lead poisoning again. It's like, that's about as intelligent as what these people are saying. Well, you haven't cured the diabetes. You haven't cured the autoimmune disease, because when they start eating this garbage again, they get the disease back again. It's like, right, that's because it's not a disease, it's a toxicity.
Yeah. Yeah. Anup, would you want to take the next question?
Yeah. Before I come to, the important point of vilification of meat and saturated fat, I have one question with respect to gut health, recovery from, messed up by steroids. Do you think peptide treatment works?
Oh, like the various peptides that are sort of in vogue at the moment. It's not something that I've looked into all that much. I mean, I've seen some very favorable preliminary sort of reports. I certainly know people who prescribe them and say that they get good results in their patients. But it's not something I know too much about. It's something that I'd like to see, more long-term data on those, certainly.
So now coming back to meat and saturated fat, why has it been vilified so much? That is part A of the question. And to put it in a simplistic manner, how many eggs, for example, can one eat in a day?
That's a wonderful question.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's like any other sorts of meat. I think when you're eating just meat or eggs, your body will tell you how much to eat. And so just like a koala knows how much to eat, just like a leopard knows how much to eat, or a hippopotamus or an elephant or a giraffe or a cow, they all just know what to eat. Something internally tells them how much to eat and when to stop. And that's because they're eating what they're designed to eat. And if they are fed kibble and grains and things like that, they actually tend to overeat, just like we do.
If I can interject, my question was primarily based on cholesterol fear.
Oh, I mean, as many eggs as you have. So, there's so cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. That was a scapegoat by the sugar companies. They invented that idea that cholesterol caused heart disease, and then they paid off various professors and researchers to propagate that lie. And we know that because we have their records and documents where they said they did that. And that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016. So, one of the Harvard professors that they paid off was then named head of the USDA, and he was the one who made the official USDA recommendation and decree that cholesterol causes heart disease. So that's a complete fiction. And when you have something based on a false premise, you have to just throw the entire thing out and start over. And if you looked back at the data that they had available at that time, there were exactly 5 randomized controlled trials on cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. And so they replaced saturated fat with unsaturated fats and margarines and things like that. And they said, okay, what happens? 3 of them showed absolutely no benefit by lowering cholesterol, by replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fat. And 2 of them actually showed harm, that you actually got worse. People had more deaths and higher mortality rate from in the group, the experiment group, where they lowered cholesterol and LDL by replacing it with margarine and plant fats. The most well-designed and controlled one, and the one with the highest amount of patients, had about nearly 10,000 patients. It was the Minnesota coronary heart study. Ansel Keys did this and then didn't get the result that he wanted, so they buried it for 40 years. We actually found it in the basement of one of the original researchers who is now dead. His children actually uncovered it and gave it to Ramsden over at the NIH, who then published it. They had nearly 10,000 patients who were institutionalized, so they could perfectly control every single meal. And when do you get a chance to do that? Mostly people they're lying, or they have snacks and different sorts of things. You can't really control that when someone's at home. So these were institutions, and they controlled every single meal. And they studied them for years. And yes, they did indeed lower cholesterol and LDL by replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fats and these seed oils with plant sterols and things like that will lower LDL. And more people died of heart attacks and stroke as a result, right? So that's not good. They're also, I mean, we just know physiologically our body makes most of the vast majority of cholesterol that we have. If you eat more plant fats, they have plant sterols. That's a plant version of cholesterol. It's similar enough to our cholesterol that it mimics that, and our liver thinks that we have enough, so it doesn't make as much. That's why it lowers down some of the cholesterol. Also, from a different metabolic standpoint, if you are eating carbohydrates, your liver doesn't need to make carbohydrates. You don't need to mobilize your fat from your adipose tissue to the rest of your body. And so it's the cholesterol molecules, LDL and the HDL molecules, that actually transport fat around the body. And so when you're eating carbohydrates, you actually suppress that whole system. So it's not about eating more fat. It's about not eating carbohydrates and not eating plant sterols. And so if you just fast for a number of days, your cholesterol goes right up. Right? In the exact same way that you would see if someone goes on a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet, exact same response. And so our body's physiologically, naturally trying to go into that state. And we're just curtailing it by giving ourselves plant sterols and carbohydrates. So more people die when you lower cholesterol. The Journal of the American College of Cardiology published a landmark paper in 2020 looking at all the best randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, all the top tier levels of evidence. And they found no association whatsoever between dietary saturated fat intake and cardiovascular disease. In fact, they found a protective mechanism against stroke. They found that people who ate more saturated fat had lower rates of stroke. People who ate less saturated fat had higher rates of stroke. We also know that if you feed people a lot of eggs or a lot of dietary cholesterol, it really doesn't change their serum cholesterol much at all. There are studies looking at, I believe it was giving them like something like 30-something eggs a day for weeks, and it didn't appreciably change their cholesterol at all. And so, that idea that, we're eating this cholesterol and it's harmful, you don't even absorb a lot of it. You absorb what you need, but your body makes a majority of it. So you can eat as many eggs as you want. In fact, you really do want to. There was a study done in India, in rural India, where they found that, people being poor, they were trying to just sell their eggs and all these sorts of things just to bring in some money. And so they were selling all the eggs that their chickens made. And they said, hey, why don't you give those to your kids and instead of selling them? So they had it controlled. And they said, okay, we'll pay for you guys to hold back 1 egg a day for your kids. And the rest of them, we'll sort of see how they do. So they controlled it against their peers in the school. And they found that those children who received just 1 extra egg a day, on average, increased their IQs compared to their peers by 10 to 15 points. And that's been replicated in Africa with just meat, eating just a larger amount of grams of meat. And so the animal-based proteins, fats, choline, DHA, EPA, vitamin D, cholesterol, these sorts of carnitine, only 70% of people make enough carnitine. People say that's a non-essential amino acid. That's not the case. That's only conditionally correct. And 30%, nearly 1/3 of the human population, cannot make a sufficient amount of carnitine, and that is required for the proper functioning and development of the brain. And so if you have a 1 in 3 chance of your kid not being able to have make enough carnitine, and so you need to make sure that they have enough of these nutrients for proper neuronal development. And so I think you can make a decision for yourself and do whatever you want to. You want to kill your brain, you want to destroy your health, that's your business, but you don't get to do that with your kids.
Yeah. Just one last question, and I think people wanted to ask that, and I've been dying to ask this. Dr. Chaffee, is autoimmune an idiopathic disease? I'm asking this because I heard you and Dr. Paul Mason talk about this on your podcast, and he defined idiopathic. Would you kindly clarify that for our viewers?
Yeah, so I'll misquote him here, but you said, idiopathic. You said idiopathic, which means that we're idiots and we have no idea what's causing it. We haven't figured out what it is, so which is true, and again, it goes back to just people not looking. There's no impetus or motivation to try to cure this disease except for benevolence, but there certainly isn't a product model at the end of it. And so that's fine, so we can't rely on them. We just need to know that we can't rely on those institutions to try to cure this. We need to figure this out ourselves. And then we get that out to as many people as possible. And I believe strongly that our diet and nutrition is the largest part of that cure that we'll find for people. And people are curing it now. They're coming off the medications and they're completely putting this into remission by the hundreds of thousands now. So I think that I think that cat is out of the bag, and that we just need to really start applying this. Sure, do larger studies, all for that. But I think there's certainly enough evidence now to start implementing this in our own patient population. And I have already done that, and I've seen this work by the hundreds in my specific patient cohort, and certainly by the tens of thousands in the people that I speak to online.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chaffee. I think, Shashi, you can unmute yourself. Thank you so much for coming over. I am really looking forward to having another session with you sometime soon, Dr. Chaffee, on autoimmune and carnivore, because I think there's a lot that needs to be said still. So would love you to have to come for another session very soon if you can. Shashi, would you like to say something?
Yeah, Aarti, just take me in.
So,
Dr. Chaffee, thank you very much for accepting this invite. And we wanted your view and knowledge on autoimmune condition, especially with carnivore. So thank you very much. Excellent session.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.